But I want to start with something that I didn't plan, which has got to do with the Supreme Court right now hearing the immunity, presidential immunity case at the Supreme Court. It shows us something that's really, really important and deeply disturbing about the state of things in our country. I mean, anybody with much sense knows that these are troubled times, but I think it's not widely enough known or recognized that the fact that the Supreme Court is hearing this case right now is a sign of one of the darkest things in the picture. There's no reason why this case should be heard. Everybody of any legal knowledge affirms that this, and I expect the Trump lawyers know this perfectly well, this whole presidential immunity thing is universally agreed to be a completely bogus, obviously false argument. Like so much of what Trump has done during these cases, it's a bid for time. You can appeal things and appeal things and appeal things, and you can have the most ridiculous arguments. But if you and lose at every turn, which he basically does, but he wins to the extent to which he gets the delays that he's seeking. Jack Smith wanted the Supreme Court to deal with this the way the Supreme Court dealt with the an emergency of sorts, of a similar sort, back in 1974 with the Nixon tapes. Don't make us go to this appeals court. This has got to be dealt with really quickly, really decisively, and so we can get on with doing this thing, in which there's an enormous public interest because we have a presidential election coming up, and the American people have a right to know what is the truth of the matter with respect to these, what they call the January 6th case, which involves, I would say, the most serious crimes in American history, an attempt to overthrow the Constitution, seize power against the will of the American people. It doesn't get any more serious than that. And if people are going to choose, and there's a clear chance, some people think a likelihood, I don't agree with that myself, but if there's a clear chance, and I can't dismiss it, that this guy who's been accused of these most serious crimes might actually get handed again the powers of the presidency that he abused so terribly, according to all these indictments. Well, the American people have a right to know before they have to vote what the truth of the matter is. It couldn't be clearer. Jack Smith is very good at what he does. He made the case. Anyway, I'll call this. We're here, what is it, 4.5 months later? And the Supreme Court's now hearing this thing that they never had to hear. There's an article right now, or yesterday, or the day before, in the op-ed piece in the New York Times by Andrew Weissman and Melissa Murray, very powerful NYU law school team, but Weissman in particular impresses me as extremely brilliant. And they have a piece they say there's no justifiable reason why this has to be argued. But not only did the Supreme Court, anyway, basically, to cut to at least the first stage of the chase, the Supreme Court has given Trump the delay he seeks, completely without justification, and made it most improbable that the huge public interest will be served. Now, this is part of a bigger picture. The real overarching battle in America today could be described as democracy versus fascism. Those are words, but they can be explicated so that you can see that there's a force which has been pushing America in a direction that is quite contrary to the basic values that we celebrate on the 4th of July. And it's a question about whether American democracy is going to survive against this force. What the Supreme Court did in this case, in the most obvious and blatant of situations, I mean, where the guilt of this man is already shown in terms of publicly available information beyond any reasonable doubt. Not that the jury has to hear the case properly. They're supposed to presume innocence. We citizens, if we're informed enough, know that the man is guilty of these very serious crimes. Some of them were committed right in front of our eyes. But a lot of our fellow citizens don't know what they would know if the trial were to go forward. And that's why everybody's talked about, including Jack Smith and Andrew Weissman, crackerjack guys in this field who really believe in the rule of law. They've said that this has got to be tried, public trial, before people have to choose who's going to be president in the next 4 years. And the Supreme Court, here's the deal, has sided quite clearly with the criminal against the rule of law. I mean, it's just blatant, right out there. And it signifies a huge amount. I mean, this particular criminal is the point of the spear of the force of fascism that's been rising in America for the live stream. I traced my experience with this thing and getting to see it I start with 1990 and the rise of Rush Limbaugh, gradually getting to see things and fighting against them in my way. That's what I talked about most of the time last time. This has been rising for a long time. And the point of the spear has got to do with, right now, with the Republican Party that got taken over by this sort of fascistic force between 1990 and then the rise of Trump, who is a figure who hijacked the party that had been created up until that point, 2015, 2016. He swooped in and he took this thing that had been created of a Republican base that was an extraordinary thing in American history. In general, I feel confident, though I couldn't prove it. If you had put up in front of people somebody like Donald Trump, I mean, even among the conservative people, who had the personal qualities of, flaunting the rules, being greedy, being selfish, being a bully, being a liar, being willing to use power for his own purposes, not concerned about the greater good. You could see who he was. And something had already been created by 2015, such that the Republican base was something extraordinary, I think, in American history, that it could look at a guy like that, which the fellows up there on Mount Rushmore would have said, unquestionably, this is precisely what you don't want to have as being president. And they saw him as an appealing leader to turn to and to give some kind of devotion to. I mean, people have followed various politicians in my lifetime, been fans of this guy or that guy. But the kind of following that Trump had in the Republican base, well, I know that there have been some demagogic figures in American history, Huey Long back in the 30s, but I don't really know that much about him. I'm not aware of anything in American history that's quite comparable to this political cult. Anyway, the Republican Party was made into something that he could take over, and then he took it over. He became the Republican nominee. He became, with the help of Putin and James Comey, he squeaked by into the presidency despite losing the popular vote. And then he acted in the Oval Office increasingly recklessly, all the way up to trying to overthrow the election and seize power against the will of the American people. He fit pretty well in with the overall spirit of the fascism that was gradually taking over the party and becoming less and less hidden. The Supreme Court sided with him, unnecessarily prolonging this thing so that he would get the advantage of not having all that truth exposed through a trial where only facts and the law get to speak, as opposed to all the lies he can come out and speak outside the courtroom. It's a lover of the Supreme Court. Historically, I go back to 1964 of having a love affair with the Supreme Court and its history and the whole concept of the rule of law and all the creativity and with a fairly frequent unfortunate things coming out like Dred Scott and Plessy versus Ferguson, all these signs of corruption that have been in America here and there. Nonetheless, overall, the creation of a system in which the use of power is going to be governed by the law. And the law is going to ultimately be made by the representatives of the people, et cetera, et cetera. I love that stuff. And I love the work that's been done to create the system. Andrew Weissman and Neil Katyal and a bunch of other former federal prosecutors devoted their lives to and are really very good at explaining. I feel like I've been, educated in new ways about the law by people that have all this trial experience. And here we've got a hearing in front of the Supreme Court, which we know, they're not stupid. We know that some kind of a majority, we don't know anything about who, but we can guess, sided with the criminal, who is the point of the spear of the force of fascism that's threatening American democracy. The Supreme Court is supposed to be the place where you go to get our conflicts resolved according to the law and peaceably. They're supposed to sit on top of the Constitution and all the statutes and apply them appropriately and with wisdom, the best that we can arrange to have such a court. They adjudicate between the two conflicting sides, but this hearing today shows that this court, in the most obvious way, in the most vital part of the battlefield where the destiny of the country is going to be handled, which is the next presidential election, is a biggie. There are lots of battles going on. It's a big war. It's not going to be over regardless of how things go in the 2024 election. But this is huge. And they have made themselves deliberately, I think, beyond a reasonable doubt, they have made themselves the agents of one of the two conflicting sides, not applying the law. It was the Supreme Court of 1974 knew what their job was, and they decided, I think unanimously with one recusal, that Nixon had to provide the tapes, and that was the end of Nixon's presidency. This Supreme Court should have been doing exactly the same thing. And that's what Jack Smith said back in December, when it would have been possible for the rule of law to have held this man accountable for those crimes and to prevent the force of fascism from taking over the presidency. So people talk about might the Supreme Court hand down a decision like tomorrow or something like that. The guy from Slate, Mark Stern, three names anyway. Mark Joseph Jacob. Anyway, he's a legal commentator on Slate magazine. He thinks that there's virtually no chance because anybody who wants to write a dissent can simply say, I'm not ready yet, and it won't come out till late June or early July. I don't, that's just a custom. But if the Supreme Court, are they going to change their minds? I wish that there had been much more of a hue and cry. I think it should have been trumpeted across the country that the Supreme Court had sided with the criminal. What we should understand about the Supreme Court right now is that in this battle between democracy and fascism, the Supreme Court is now occupied territory by one of the sides, and it's the wrong side. It's the side where the few get to dominate the many. It's a side where the rich get to take more wealth from the poor, and so on and so on. It's a side that facilitates the persecution of vulnerable peoples. It's a pattern which we've seen in other societies. And in the ugliest